Hello everyone, this is G from NYC and I'm back with another video. I put out a bunch, like 6 yesterday. I was just in the mood to work and get a lot of videos done, especially since I was just in the house, in the apartment I should say. I don't live in a house, I wish. But just in the apartment, decided to just do a bunch of videos covering different topics. Today's video count's probably going to be a lot lower, especially since I have to work on my Avengers 20 review. That's going to be a big one. I gotta put in, I've got all the pictures I want. I've got all the images I want. It's just not gonna do the narration and then spice it all in. So that's a project. That's a project, but it needs that type of attention because of what Jason Aaron did to She-Hulk in that issue. I already made a video about a week ago expressing my thoughts on Jason Aaron dumping on the classic version, the sensational version of She-Hulk, which is her most famous version. But I haven't done a review of Avengers 20 yet, so I'm working on that. So today's video count's going to be a lot less, especially since this is the first video of the day, and at least here in New York, as I was saying, here in New York, it's a little after 2 p.m. So I'm definitely getting a late start in comparison to yesterday, where I started making videos early in the morning. So there's that. That's a little, I guess, inside baseball, I guess, behind the scenes as regards the state of the videos. So, as always, I would like to welcome everybody back to the channel, whether you've been here from day one or whether this is your first day. Welcome. I hope you enjoyed the content. In particular, according to the YouTube overlords, I have a new subscriber. I believe the name is come on phone. Oh yes, according to YouTube, Dev the Best 374 new account. So welcome, Dev the Best 374 new account. I hope that you enjoy the content. So the content of today's video is going to be a comic review. But it's going to be a classic comic review, and it's actually going to be in praise of a comic for once in life. Excuse me. So the comic I'm going to be discussing today is the early 1990s run of Silver Sable and the Wildpack. So let me just give a brief overview of who Silver Sable is and what the Wildpack is and what this particular version was in the 1990s. Silver Sable in the comics is a character who I believe originated in the Spider-Man comics, right? She's a mercenary for a fictional Eastern European country called Simcaria, if I remember correctly. And at least the way the comics always portray it, she's like the one person who generates any money for this country. But basically, she runs a mercenary band of what you would call social outcasts, and I'll get into that later about why that's actually so important in this particular run of Silver Sable. But basically, she's got her origins in Spider-Man. She's a mercenary. She's I don't know if I wouldn't say she's the ruler of Simcaria, but she definitely holds a lot of political influence and power. I don't think she's a princess technically, but her homeland, her people, essentially treat her like a princess, and they show her the same love and respect. Again, the way Marvel paints it is that she's pretty much Simcaria's savior, and somehow she keeps the country's monies running by running a small merc band. It makes no sense, but this is Marvel Comics. So that's Silver Sable herself. As a character, she can be very, especially since she runs a mercenary band, she can be very bossy, she can be very demanding, a bit high-strung, always demanding perfection, but in an endearing, likable way, right? She's basically a sort of, stern teacher, taskmaster type of character. But one of the things that stands out about her, especially in the 1990s run, is that she's willing to give people especially people who are not, say, socially accepted, right, a second chance. Right? So she does have a heart. She hides it behind the weapons and the guns and whatnot, but she does have a heart. In fact, the first issue addresses just that. There's a mission. I don't want to spoil it because I really think this is a series you should read. But there is a mission. She has a option of different missions she can take. And there's a mission that hits pretty close to home. It actually involves a member of her family. And she initially turns it down because logically it doesn't make any sense for her to take on the mission, right? And I guess sort of her mission control is sort of shocked that she won't do it, and it gives the impression that she's heartless, and she at the moment plays like she doesn't really care about what mission control thinks. But then she goes off in the cover of darkness at night and takes on the mission herself, because despite herself, right, she can't let, this member of her family, suffer. And in this case, the person has been kidnapped and they're an innocent. They can't defend themselves, right? And even though she knows logically she shouldn't go, right, she's also a human being and it's a family member, right? She really can't turn her back on it as much as she realizes logically that she probably should. So she can be soft-hearted, right? She's one of those classic characters, especially in the 80s and 90s, right? They put on a tough front, but they really are compassionate deep inside, right? They have a heart, they just don't like showing it. So there's that. And in particular, what stands out about Sable is that she's a Nazi hunter. I mean, literally. She hunts down whatever surviving Nazis there are. In fact, in the 1990s run, not only was she hunting down Nazis, she was hunting down and she was trying to find the Nazis that killed her father, or at least she believes killed her father. A good chunk of the story revolves around the unraveling of Sable's past and what really happened when her father supposedly died. So that's another interesting point. There was a comic that came out in 2017. I think it was in late 2017. There was a one-shot. I thought it was okay, but it definitely wasn't Silver Sable in the Wildpack. And there was a controversy at the time because Sable ends up executing a old lady. I personally wasn't bothered by it because, one, the old lady is a Nazi and Sable hunts Nazis, and two, the old lady was clearly unsympathetic and unmoved by the what she did and the lives that she helped take in the cause. So I'm not surprised that the Nazi hunter killed a Nazi nurse who was unrepentant about what she did. But that caused a little bit of a stir. It was a one-shot comic. Didn't really go anywhere. I actually liked it because, to me, for the most part, it was just dumb fun. It was a throwback, although there was no Wildpack, and that was a problem in my opinion. But it was just basically a throwback to the 1990s spy merc band type of comic that Sable was a part of back then. So I liked it. But anyway, this is about the 1990s version. I'm just trying to give a little backstory for those who may not be familiar with the character. And one more thing, especially if you're only familiar with the character via the PS4 Spider-Man game, I beg of you, if that's all you know about her through that game, read a few of her comics, especially from the 1990s. Or if you don't want to read them, just look at them. Okay, the way that PS4 game made Sable and Black Cat look, I have to admit, it insults me. It bugs the bejesus out of me. It bugs the bejesus out of me because there's supposed to be an element of femininity and glamour to the way Silver Sable and Black Cat, especially Black Cat. She's Marvel's answer to Catwoman. There's supposed to be an element of glamour and femininity and sexiness to the way they look. Silver Sable is never supposed to look like an old lady. She is an old lady. She's got to be, somewhere in her 40s. I think her age is never quite given, but just the way she behaves and the way that she's typically drawn older. I always thought she was probably in her late 40s, but her late 40s to her late 30s to early 40s. But she's not supposed to look it, right? The best equivalent that I can give, if you're familiar to Silver Sable, is if you're familiar with Full Metal Alchemist, right? Then you probably know the character Major General Armstrong, Olivier Armstrong, right? And how she's older looking, but she's not unattractive, right? And actually, she has a personality actually quite similar to Silver Sable. She's just 100 times meaner. So if you want a comparison, I would say that Sable has a lot in common with her, both in the fact that, again, she's very feminine looking, but she doesn't act it, and she's a very, very, very demanding woman. Although I would say is that Olivier Armstrong is the basic tenets of Sable's personality turned up to 100. That's the best way I would describe it. So hopefully this 11 minutes has given you sort of a background and an idea into who Silver Sable as a character is, because this is going to be important in her relation to the Wildpack and why this comic to me is so good. Okay, so on to the review itself, right? Silver Sable and the Wildpack in many ways is your, and I want to be clear on this, we're talking about the early 90s run. I believe it ran from like 1992 to about 1995. I still have to finish reading through it, but I've read a lot of it, so I think I've read enough to give a review. But I will admit I have not finished the entire series yet. I think it's on like 30 issues. It's not a lot. It's not a lot. You can find it online. But anyway, right, Silver Sable. The Silver Sable in the Wildpack comic, I should say, is in many ways your standard 1990s comic of the day. The art is pure 1990s. There are some issues that have better art, there are some issues that have worse art, but they all held to the standard that was popular in the 1990s, right? So it's bright colors, it's gaudy costumes, it's everybody is hyper masculine and hyper feminine. Well, everybody important, right? The like side characters, like the mission control that Sable has, they're drawn fairly normal looking, right? They have sort of normal bodies, but again, like your heroes and your villains in the story, everybody is ridiculously jacked. Pro wrestling got nothing on 90s comics in the being muscularly jacked department. So there's that, right? So it is in many ways a 1990s comic. It has 1990s art. There's a lot of action. There's a lot of shooting, right? And Silver Sable is, as a character, as an archetype, is in the same mold as, say, Domino, right? She's the strong 90s spy mercenary type character that was popular at that time. So in many ways, Silver Sable and the Wildpack is like any other 1990s comic of that genre that you'll find. And I don't say that to be mean. I like the comic. I like it a lot. I'm just saying, that's just the genre or the archetype that it falls into. What makes the Silver Sable comic stand out to me, and one of the reasons why I like it so much is, especially if you compare it to today's comics, is that in many ways it is a early to mid 1990s SJW comic, and I say that with quotation marks around the term, done right. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that the comic was actually bold enough. The writers for the comic, and the writers changed. It wasn't, just one set of writers or artists. It changed over the comics. But the writers for the comic were bold enough to confront the social issues of the day, right, of the early 90s. Not only did they confront these issues in the comic, which is something Marvel has well been known for doing, right? One of their slogans is, "The world outside your window," right? So introducing social issues into a comic is nothing new for Marvel, but where this book, in my opinion, stood out is that for its time, I think that it actually was fair when it came to depicting these social issues because it didn't make you pick a side, right? It just had the characters, for the most part, act in character, right? And whatever side you fell on didn't matter because you're the reader. It's passive. Everybody, whether they're for something or against something, is in character. It's not trying to force you to see things a certain way. It just presents the issue as it is, or at least as how the writer or how Sable, whoever, sees it, and they respond accordingly. So I appreciate that it's not trying to tell me what to think about this issue, which is now 20 plus years old, whatever the issue was at the time. Another thing that I really liked about Silver Sable and the Wildpack, and what I honestly think makes it incredibly, I don't like to use this term because it's a bit crude, but I think it applies. What makes it incredibly ballsy as a story is the Wildpack and the type of people that made up the Wildpack then. The Wildpack in the 1990s, right, they can best be described as a discount version of the X-Men who have no powers, who are not as talented, but who most importantly are deplorables. And I don't say that to be joking or to I can't think of the term, but I don't say that to get attention. I mean it. Let me explain who the Wildpack of the 1990s is, right? You have Chen, right? You have Chen, who is a Vietnamese assassin. A Vietnamese assassin of a certain sexuality that certainly would have been frowned upon back in the early 1990s. Let's just put it that way. There is a reason why she constantly refers to Sable as Milady. We'll just leave it there. So there's Chen. Then you have Crippler, who is a former member of Hydra. I want to repeat that. Former member of Hydra. And we all know Hydra, right, has ties to the Nazis and all these other, socially unacceptable groups. Right? So you have a former Hydra agent, you have a Vietnamese assassin, right? What else? You have Sandman, not Neil Gaiman's Sandman, the Spider-Man Sandman, who's trying to turn over a new leaf at this particular point. So you have a criminal, right? You have a well-known, very dangerous criminal, right, among you. You have I forget the guy's name, but there's one guy. He serves as kind of like the pilot of the group, right? He's a former gangbanger, right? So another dangerous criminal, right? You have Battlestar, who's probably probably the most overt, probably the only overt good guy on the team. He's like the token good guy. Right, and if I were to describe Battlestar, the best way I would describe him is take Sam Wilson, the Falcon, put him in the Captain America costume, and now pump him full of steroids so that he's as big as a pro wrestler. That's Battlestar. And then you have Powell, who is the second in command after Sable and the default leader of the Wildpack group again after Sable, and the default field commander again after Sable, right? So he's, for all intents and purposes, the second in command. To say that Powell is a discount version of Gambit is to be nice. Powell is, again, a discount version of Gambit, but whereas Gambit is charming, it has at least some respect for women. Powell is charmless and has absolutely no respect for women. He makes it no secret that he wants to get into Sable's pants. He never does, because Sable isn't a fool. She has sketchy taste in men, but she's not that foolish. But on top of this, not only that, right? So you have a guy who has no respect for his commander and just wants to sleep with her. But on top of all that, right? That's not what makes him a deplorable, believe it or not. What makes him a deplorable is the fact that he's a former bodyguard. I want to make this clear. I'm not joking when I say this. Powell, who, again, is second in command to Silver Sable, is a former bodyguard to the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. I'm going to repeat that. The second in command of the superhero team, for all intents and purposes, of the good guy team, is a former bodyguard of for the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. No way in hell that happens in Marvel today. And not only is he a former, I want to be clear, the story never says he was a member of the Klan. It just gets him dangerously close by saying that he was a bodyguard for the Ku Klux, for the Grand Wizard of the Klan. And on top of that, right, he has issues with black people, right? He's not he's not someone who is cured of his prejudice. He has issues really with everybody who is not white, which means that he has issues with Quintino. That's the gangbanger guy. That's his name. So he has issues with Quintino. At least I think that's his name. With Quintino, with Chen because she's Asian, but especially with Battlestar, because Battlestar is African American, right? So it's like, of all the racial groups he has issues with, Battlestar is the one he has issues with the most. And guess what Sable does? Sable intentionally teams him up with Battlestar because she knows that Powell, is not comfortable around the guy, and that he has these misgivings about African Americans. So her idea of sort of making Powell confront this is basically exposure therapy, right? Make him work with the only black guy on the team, who, keep in mind, is also the most overtly good person on the team. Everybody else is an anti-hero, or again, they have this dark past. Battlestar is just basically Sam Wilson, again, on steroids. He's the most overtly good guy character of the Wildpack. And this is what, to me, makes this comic stand out so much then and even now. The fact that they were willing to have your superhero team be full of people who are not necessarily heroic. Again, your field commander is a racist, basically. And something else that this comic does that I really appreciate is the fact that it does not, how do I put it? It could have taken the easy route and just, bashed on Crippler, who's the former Hydra agent. Could have bashed on Powell, right? It could have set these characters up as straw men, as often happens in comics today, right? But these characters are not set up as straw men. This comic, right, and it is perfect, I'm not saying it's perfect, but this comic does try to take a sincere look at these type of ideologies, and it asks the question of why. Why does Powell feel this way? There's actually one scene that always stands out to me in my mind, is that the Wildpack, it's a little further on in the books, but the Wildpack, right, so Powell, Chen, Battlestar, all of them, they head out to a bar, right? Sable's off doing something else. They have a night off. They go to a bar, right? So at the bar, right? Powell is checking out. He's checking out the ladies, right? And he notices a African American woman that he finds attractive, right? And he tries to make a move on her. A fight then ensues, right? And the girls end up leaving. But something that's interesting is that Battlestar, I believe it's Battlestar, right? Because what happens is afterwards, Battlestar, sort of like jokingly, mentions the fact that he was checking out his sister, right? And of course Powell denies it. And then Battlestar, if I remember correctly, Battlestar just pretty much comes out with it, and he's like, "Dude, I'm not blind. I saw you looking at her." He's like, what's your deal?" Right? He's like, why do you hate black people yet simultaneously find yourself attracted to a black woman? Right? It's that type of thing. And Powell can't answer. Right? But he's forced to think about it. We see both in the entire scene itself that Powell is conflicted because he knows that his misgivings are wrong. He understands that. He knows that. But he can't get over them. As much as he logically understands that his views are wrong, he cannot emotionally overcome that. And again, instead of attacking him and painting him as this, irredeemable person, it actually takes a sympathetic look at a guy, or rather, I should say, although in this case it's a man, at a person like him, right, who has these conflicting feelings, who sees that this narrative that they've come to believe for whatever reason is wrong, but they also really can't pull themselves away from it at the same time. It humanizes Powell, and it humanizes, at least to me, anybody who is similar to Powell. And that's what I really appreciate about the comic. It didn't dumb it down, right? I've said in a few videos that the comics I have come across or that I review are very reductive, right? In that they just boil something down to its barest point, right? Without giving any sort of explanation, any nuance, any content, any context. The Silver Sable comic was the opposite of that. And that's not to say that it didn't make bunkles here and there in characterization or in touching upon certain social issues of the day. There's actually one series of issues where Sable and the Wildpack basically get pulled into like a inner city gang war, right? And I felt that one was a bit touchy. I was like, I think you're kind of missing the mark, but I can at least appreciate the writer for at least trying it. And plus there's this hilarious scene where this African American woman who's sort of like she's sort of like the reason why the gang war is happening, right? She likes to present herself as sort of like above it all, kind of haughty, but then this is one scene where like basically everything's taken from her, right? Her brother's killed, her empire is falling. She blames Sable for it naturally, right? Because she's a villain. So she isn't going to blame herself. She's going to blame Sable for everything that's happened. And it's like this I guess veneer, right? Or this act of that, she's a classy black woman drops and she just goes straight ghetto. She pulls off the earrings. She puts Vaseline on her face. This chick is ready to fight. She does the whole 9 yards. And I found it absolutely hilarious because while that sequence was not perfect, there were a few things missing, right? There was a touch of authenticity there, right? Because yes, that's what happens when girls in the hood, which is where this particular character came from, that's what they do when they are ready to fight. This is the equivalent of like putting on war paint and all this other stuff. So there was a touch of authenticity to it that I can appreciate. And even in the issues that are bad. Like there's, what is it, 2 or 3 issues where she's teamed up with Luke Cage, where the story really is just plain dumb. But it's one of those things where it's so bad it's good. And the best part of those issues is the interaction between her and Luke Cage, because Cage keeps needling her. Cage keeps making these comments, especially. Sorry, as I was saying, Luke keeps needling Sable with his comments, especially about her bossiness, and he actually makes a massa joke, right? He makes a masta joke at her expense, which gets right under her skin. And again, I just find it hilarious. Their interaction is very fun to read, because again, Marvel does not have the guts. Marvel doesn't have the stones, let's just put it that way, to actually write something like that anymore, to let the characters excuse me, be true to themselves. They always want to prop up race, right, as some sort of thing, or at least most of the writers at Marvel, the modern comic industry in general, want to prop up race, I should say, as something that they defend and they protect, yet they don't give us real, authentic characters of any ethnicity or of any gender. They just keep writing these caricatures, as I said it in another video. Excuse me. They keep writing these caricatures with no thought to characterization, with no thought to how the people in these communities that they claim to defend would feel about these characters. So, again, what I appreciate about Silver Sable is that it's willing to go there. It's willing to actually ask these questions regarding race, regarding racism. Actually willing to take a racist character, put him on the good guy team, and then actually have the nerve to ask why. Why is he this way? Why does he feel this way? Actually present him in a sympathetic light without endorsing his viewpoints. His viewpoints are never once endorsed as something that is good or appropriate. His viewpoints, at no point are his viewpoints normalized, as Extra Credits keeps worrying about. At no point does the comic try to say that Powell's views are correct. The comic keeps pointing out the various ways that his viewpoints are wrong or they're short-sighted, and this, that, and the other. But instead of just painting him as a strawman racist that has to be torn down, it actually looks at him, and the other characters, but especially him, as a person. Right? It treats all the characters in the series, for the most part, as people. And that's what I appreciate about it. Issues about abortion come up. Again, social issues of the day, such as AIDS and whatnot, come up. And for a comic book, I do think that it handles the issue pretty well. Definitely better than it's handled today, because the characters are allowed to remain in character. They don't go preaching to you what you should think. Right? They just do as they do, basically. And plus, the social issue, while present, never overtakes the book. It never stops being this fun, mercenary band, spy action romp. It doesn't go from, guns blazing and, the good guys chasing the villain and the villain chasing the bad guy. It never goes from that to a lecture about how you should feel about AIDS in the 1990s. It doesn't do that. It's just good fun. It's just good fun that happens to sprinkle, not social justice, despite me calling it an SJW comic earlier, but social issues, right, into the work. Just as X-Men is done, and it's just as many of Marvel's comics have done over its long history. So, I would like, if you want to, right, you can find the series online, you can read it for free. And if you're familiar with it, or if you've read it, tell me what you think. I really like it because, again, of how it touched upon these social issues and how it actually took as honest a look as a comic book can at, racism and what causes it, and, the viewpoints and why people think the way they do, without endorsing racism and without building up Powell as a straw man to just be burnt down, right? He's treated as a person with conflicts, a person, who doesn't always live up to what he says, right? A person who is hypocritical. But as much as his views are presented as wrong, he is never presented as evil. He's not necessarily presented as a good guy. Again, the whole point of the Wildpack is that, with the exception of Battlestar, nobody's a saint. But he's not presented, again, as this irredeemable, evil, person either. And so there's that. So in closing, I think you should check this comic out if you want to. Also, one more thing. I must give, let me try to say your name right, buddy. Strigid Lanathiel? Is that how you say your last name? You gave a pronunciation explanation in one of your responses. I think you wrote it as Lanathiel. I have no idea if I'm saying it right. I apologize if I'm getting it wrong. But I gotta actually give him credit for this review, because it was his comment, or two of his comments actually, on two of my videos, where he talked about how when people feel disenfranchised, right? People in part become, according to his comments, people in part become radicalized because they feel disenfranchised, because they are basically pushed out of the group, right? They're erased, and then they just start going to places that will accept them, that say, hey, we'll take you in, we'll accept you, right? And then they end up, or at least have the possibility of ending up being radicalized and embracing the very toxic ideologies that the mainstream media, keeps saying are so evil. That's how you radicalize somebody, for example, for the Nazis, true Nazis, or for ISIS. So when I read his comments, I actually thought this is the perfect time to do the Silver Sable review, because of the fact that Silver Sable, in my opinion, did the very opposite of what Strigid was talking about. At least to me, it did not alienate, right? It didn't alienate people. I think it's one of those things that would actually unite people. What entertainment used to do, whether it be comics or TV or sports or whatever, is that it used to unite. It used to bring people together. You could leave your hang-ups, whatever they were, at the door. It was actually expected that you would leave, the political debates, the social debates, the racial debates, whatever it was, that you would leave it at the door. That everybody's here at whatever this is, this comic gathering, this movie, this concert, this sports game, whatever it is. Everybody's here for the same reason, to have a good time. Leave the conflicts at the door, leave them outside. So long as you're here, let's have fun. That's what entertainment used to be about. Not to say that entertainment's never had messages, certainly it has. But first and foremost, entertainment used to be something that brought people together, right? Comics used to be something that, it could be one of those things like, for example, a black person and a skinhead could hate each other, but they could both agree that Wolverine is an awesome character, right? A skinhead and a Black Panther, and I don't mean the Black Panther, I mean actually the Black Panther activists, right? Could hate each other, but they could both agree that Storm is an awesome character. Like, it used to be that one sort of neutral ground, neutral zone, that people could, for the most part, be in agreement on. And sadly, that's been taken from us by these very divisive times. So, that's my review of the comic. right? It's probably more fangirling than a proper review, but it was nice to actually talk about something in the positive again instead of pointing out everything that was wrong. And I did admit that it's not a perfect comic, so I like to think I was fair. But anyway, let me know what you think in the comics, especially if you're familiar with the Silver Sable run from the 1990s. Let me know what you thought about it, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.